President Trump says he wants to move the United States Postal Service to the Commerce Department. The Postal Service has been independent of the executive branch of the federal government since President Richard Nixon signed the Postal Reorganization Act in 1970. Robert Shea is co-founder and partner of Gov Navigators. He's former associate director at the Office of Management and Budget. Scott Quehl is vice president for civilian growth at Maximus. He's former chief financial officer and assistant secretary for administration at the Commerce Department. Gentlemen, welcome. It's great to have you both on the program. Robert, I start with you. What normally happens when one organization in government moves underneath the purvey of another organization in government?
Well, it's not that normal for it to happen, but generally the administration would propose, or someone in Congress would propose, a reorganization of that agency, the moving it from one to another. This would involve a lot of deliberation, and generally reorganizations are under the jurisdiction of the House and Senate oversight committees. In this case, we're talking about the Postal Service. That also falls within the jurisdiction of those committees. So it's actually fairly simple to the extent you're moving this through legislation. To do it administratively would be unprecedented. And then you've got a lot of other moving parts like the Postal Regulatory Commission and how or whether that would move, a lot of moving parts to consider.
Is it, are there potential wrinkles also? Because as I mentioned, it's an independent organ. It's not technically an executive branch organization at this point.
That's right, but it does have an appropriation. It is entangled with a bunch of different statutes, so it would not be out of the question for it to be brought back in to the federal government, because it, as you know, it's been working under a deficit for many, many years.
Scott, welcome. It's good to have you on the program, too. What's your sense of why commerce is the landing spot that the administration is considering for the Postal Service?
Well, Francis, I would say first there is kind of a can-do culture amongst its exceptional career staff there. You need to launch a weather satellite, you go to Commerce. You need to implement the CHIPS Act, you go to Commerce. You need to connect broadband throughout the nation, you go to Commerce. So there is that spirit and that culture. It is an expert culture where you have, and I say that without the slightest bit of, it's not an arrogant question, it's simply a fact. If you're collecting and disseminating weather information, you're examining patents, you are analyzing and producing our country's economic data, you are running our census, and so you get the point. This is a very expert, very hands-on federal department. There is a tradition of excellent customer service. There was a Business USA initiative which connected 20 different federal agencies to all to small businesses through digitally. Now that was a number of years ago, but I thought it was a strong first effort. And there is a component, a bureau within Commerce, the Patent and Trademark Office, that does run on a fee-for-service basis largely. And there is, every 10 years, there is this massive undertaking called the decennial census, where hundreds of thousands of temporary workers under the census, permanent staff's leadership, are going to over 100 million households a year to collect data and then interpret it and disseminate it.
Scott hit on something that I think is important to consider too, Robert, and that is with the emphasis over the last two administrations, first Trump administration and then the Biden administration from your former office, on customer experience. Any place that customer experience is going to be emphasized is probably a good fit, at least to have some influence on what the Postal Service does. Is that fair to say, do you think?
I absolutely think it's fair to say. When I was at the Office of Management and Budget, and we were looking to consolidate a bunch of programs aimed at urban development, we looked to the Commerce Department because it's got an incredible relationship with the business community, and it was a natural place for those programs to go. Very, very well run, a diversity of missions unlike almost any other agency or department of the federal government. And this analog of the patent and trademark can't be understated. Nothing like the size and complexity of the Postal Service, but it is delivering a very complicated service patents and trademarks to people who pay them for that service.
Scott, what has to happen mechanically inside an organization like the Commerce Department, especially in the financial management shop, to be able to prepare to take on something of the size of the Postal Service? I imagine that's an extraordinary undertaking.
I would think so, because while Commerce has many strengths, and you can see why it might be considered as a landing spot, the fact is that you might be looking at an organizational apple versus an orange. You have so at Commerce, if you look at, I guess, the scale of Postal Service, and I'm certainly not an expert at it, but about 127 billion parcels a year delivered, day after day. The relentless expectation of every single day delivery of your parcel on time and at an affordable cost. And if you consider that, compare that to Commerce, which once every 10 years will do a decennial census, right?
That's right.
And just imagine, and I can't imagine, I've been there, the focus and management attention on doing that once. And then to do it, that's your daily, that's the daily expectation. It has to be the daily expectation. On time, affordable, relentless delivery at a high quality. So that if you consider the scale and the complexity of running our nation's postal system, if you consider the, I'm just imagining, no matter how capable a secretary, if the secretary is also the postmaster general, those are two pretty demanding jobs.
Yeah.
It's the holidays, there's a weather emergency somewhere, and the holiday packages aren't being delivered. Sorry, Mr. Secretary, you're not going to go do that trade deal because you're going to be, I mean, it's just, it's hard.
Structurally, what
structurally
that
hard.
looks like is intimidating potentially.
I mean, again, I do not master the statistics, but I understand there might be 500,000 employees. At the Postal Service. You may have a quarter million vehicles. You may have about 30,000 facilities you're owning or renting. That's a lot when you're the Department of Commerce. Also, a cabinet department, or as a cabinet department, you have 40+ thousand employees. Certainly, there are lots of facilities. Certainly, there's a lot of organizational complexity.
You're right to pinpoint the politics of this, because, the Postal Service is an independent entity, but it's got a lot of constraints. So it's got to deliver to every address in the United States.
6 days a week.
Yeah, it's got to, rain or shine. It cannot willy-nilly raise the price of postage because they'll be held to pay among Congress's constituencies. And, if you don't deliver, like the current Postal Service's service is declining, and the Postal Service had been really, one of the shining lights, at least from a service perspective, of the federal government. And then, of course, its finances aren't keeping up. So those are headaches that the Commerce Department would inherit by taking on the Postal Service.
And grafting that into an executive branch agency when it's not now strikes me as maybe the most difficult piece of this, is who would want to take that on in the executive branch when it's independent now, Robert? It strikes me as maybe the most difficult part of this.
I think it'd be difficult with any organization, and merging cultures is always going to be hard. The only thing I'd say about Commerce is that it is already a place where you've got a diversity of cultures and organizational types and missions, unlike almost any other department in the government.
What's the opportunity that you see? There's a short-term win here we were talking about before we went on the air, Scott. What is that, and how would you advise Commerce to try to maximize on it if this happens?
I would pick one area common to both organizations where there's need and strength. Because of Commerce's excellent history of both digital and call center consolidation, customer service, like delivering the customer service. When there's a call, when there's an email, where there's a text, where's my package? I can imagine that essential layer of touching the customer digitally, phone, and otherwise. Maybe that very complex service could be thought about as maybe consolidated or delivered at Commerce on behalf of the Postal Service, and let the Postal Service then focus the remainder of its resources in other ways. Might be an idea.
What are the markers that you'll watch, Robert, to see whether this is something that progresses beyond the talking stage or whether this is something that kind of dies in the crib?
Well, I think we're in an environment now where things happen so quickly that I'm not sure there would be any markers in advance of this happening.
Fair.
But our friends at the Government Accountability Office have a great roadmap to follow to gauge the potential success of efforts like this. Key questions to ask to ascertain government reforms. Have you figured out why you're doing this? What are you hoping to accomplish? Have you consulted the employees, and what benefit will it be to them? Do you have a plan and the resources to accomplish the reorganization? Because it's not going to be free. It's not going to be easy. You need leadership in charge and a plan with milestones to measure progress towards getting it done. So I want to see those building blocks in place, as GAO will be watching, to make sure that if it's undertaken, it'll be successful.
Just very quickly, too, it won't be fast either.
It
This sounds like something that would take a while.
No, we're still working on the Department of Homeland Security.
20 years later.
That's right.
Robert Shea, Scott Quehl, it's great to have both of you on the program. Thanks for joining me.